Hey, now that the Fusion Festival is out, you may be wondering, should I build a deck or should I use the loaner decks that they have? And I'm gonna go ahead and go over one of the loaner decks that I have been forcing myself to use and tell you whether or not I like it and whether or not you should use it. So let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? It is called Heart of a Sky with Purse Clouds, and it is a Edge Imp and Fluffle deck. Now, at first it looks pretty alright. It has a decent amount of staples as Fluffle Cat, which is pretty good. I like using that, but there's only one in there. Next is Fluffle Rabbit, which I'm not really a big fan of this one, because Fluffle Cat is just way better because I can get a polymerization back. And then next one is Fluffle Octopus. Fluffle Octopus I don't really get to use very often because I either, it just gets knocked out because I have a brick hand, so I have to put it in defense position, or I just don't have anything in my graveyard, so it's alright. I haven't really used it. Now, Fluffle Sheep, I do like this one because I can special summon it from my hand if I have a Fluffle monster on the field. And also, it doesn't really have any good graveyard effects either, so it's just something you get on the field so you can summon something. Next is Edge Imp Sabrus. It's alright. I'm not much of a big fan, but it's one of the few Edge Imp cards they have. You have two of those for some reason. Next is Fluffle Bear. I do like this one. You can get a toy vendor from your deck, and you can put it down, which is pretty useful. And if you tribute the card, you can get polymerization in your graveyard and take it out. But I don't really get to use that effect very often. Now, Edge Imp Scythe. This is a really good card for this deck. It really honestly just saves it because as a quick effect, whenever your opponents do anything, you can essentially just fusion summon one fright for a monster, and after you do that, it goes to your graveyard, and then you can banish it from your graveyard in order to protect a fright for a monster if it was going to be destroyed by battle or card effect. So that one is really nice. Now, next one is Fluffle Dog. Fluffle Dog is an amazing card in this deck. It allows you to add one Edge Imp Sabrus or one Fluffle monster from your deck to your hand, but I found that you don't really get to add in Edge Imp that often, since you only get one. Now, next one is the Edge Imp Chain, which is an amazing card. This is one of my favorites. Edge Imp Dog, well, not Edge Imp Dog, Fluffle Dog, Edge Imp Scythe, and Edge Imp Chain are my favorites because Edge Imp Chain, whenever it gets sent to the graveyard, you can add one fright for a card from your deck to your hand, and it works whenever you send it via fusion. So, and then the other one is you can add one Edge Imp Chain from your deck to your hand if you declare attack, but I don't really get to use it that often, so it's kind of minor. Next is Edge Imp Frightful Lloyd. I'm not a big fan of this card. I don't get to use it to its full effect, so it just kind of just sits there. It's just a beat stick, really, if you have anything in your graveyard. And Fluffle Penguin, which is pretty good. You can place it on the field, and then you can special summon one Fluffle monster from your hand. Doesn't really matter what kind of Fluffle monster. I like to pair it with the Fluffle Dog, so I can get the dog's effects as well. And then whenever you use it as fusion material, you can draw two cards and discard one, which is pretty nice because often, well, whenever I use it, I occasionally get Edge Imp Chain whenever I discard it, and then I get to use that in the graveyard. Then Fluffle Dolphin. I haven't really had much of a chance to use it, but it has a decent graveyard effect, and also has a decent field effect as well. But again, I haven't really used it that much. Then they have Harpy's Feather Duster, which is a staple. It's really good. Everybody knows about it. You have two copies of Polymerization, which is alright. You can always add in another one, but it's basically you have to have that. Then they have Monster Reborn, which I don't really get to use that often because I rarely have stuff in my graveyard. Fright for Fusion, which is really useful, because you can use it whenever you have materials on the field or graveyard. Aside from polymerization, it's one of the other main targets where you just search out, assuming you can search it out, which actually I think you can if you use Edge Imp Chain. Yeah, I think that's what brings it, or Dog, something like that. You get two copies of those. I wish it was three, but oh well. Then they give you Fright for Patchwork, which is good for if you have a Fluffle hand and you don't have any Edge Imps, but most of the time you're going to have just pure edge imps or pure Fluffle, and you get screwed with his deck. But this lets you add in one edge imp monster and one polymerization, which is very good because it's a searcher. You get 3 copies of those. Then Fright for Repair. You can target one fusion monster in your graveyard, Fright for a fusion monster, return it to the extra deck, and then you can special summon one Fluffle or edge imp monster from your graveyard. And this is a pretty useful effect if you already have a polymerization, you just don't have any materials. So you just use that and then your fusion monster that's in the graveyard will get sent back to the deck. But I haven't really used the graveyard effect that often because usually I'll just end up dying. But next is Toy Vendor, which is a staple really. It's a continuous spell, but I don't like the first effect. First effect is kind of garbage, honestly, because most of the time you just won't draw anything good. And then whenever it's sent to the graveyard, that's when it gets good. You can add one Edge Imp Sabrus or one Fluffle monster from your deck to your hand. This is a really good searcher. Then they have Defusion, which it's useful. I usually treat it like a counter trap spell really, because a lot of the times the enemy with this deck has like no negates basically, but whenever the enemy decides to fusion something, they'll usually get rid of my stuff. So I use Defusion, get rid of their stuff, and then build up my board again. And then they give you Super Poly. Now, I haven't gone to the extra deck yet, but Super Poly is useless in this deck. Do you want to know why? It is useless because almost all of my extra deck monsters require Fright Fur, Edge Imp, or Fluffle monsters. That's it. You can't use Super Poly on anything but those. So the only real use for Super Poly is so you can get these, well, get some of your monsters on the field and then use Super Poly in place of regular Poly. But that's it. Like the only thing you can Super Poly from your opponent's side is Mud Dragon, and that's basically useless. It doesn't really do anything. So you have 2 copies of Super Poly, but they do jack crap. So it's a useless card essentially. If you get 1 or more in your hand, you just have a dead card spot. It's better just place it on the field as fodder to see if somebody has Harpy's Feather Duster in their deck. Now, next is Cosmic Cyclone. Pay 1000 LP and target one spell/trap on the field and banish it. This is an amazing card. I wish they added more than one, but oh well, that's just what you gotta deal with. This one comes in clutch a lot of the time because your opponent will place down a field spell. So you can just take it out with this, assuming they don't have a counter trap to protect it, and then you should be good to go. Next card is Called by the Grave. It's an amazing card. You could target one monster in your opponent's graveyard and banish it. So if you're trying to do some plays and they decide to pull out Ash Blossom, you just use this on them and you'll be safe, assuming they don't have a counter trap or counter spell for this. Next is Necrofusion. It's a normal trap, so it's not that good, but it's alright. Like, I wouldn't really want to use it if I had a Fright for Fusion on me, or even Fright for Repair. Honestly, I would rather. This is like the backup to backup strat, so luckily there's only 1 copy of it in the deck. So next is Fright for March. Now this one is pretty nice because if you have a Fright for on the field, you can use this card to negate the activation of a spell/trap card effect or monster effect that targets a Fright for monster. Of course, it doesn't work on any other spells such as they just destroy the entire field. It doesn't work on those. It only works on targeting spells. But whenever you do that, you can negate the activation, and then you can destroy 1 card, which I usually go for a Fright for a monster, destroy that, and then I'll summon in the what is it called? Sabertooth, so I can get that monster back after I use it. So it's a pretty good card. I like this card a lot. I wish there was more than just 1 copy in the deck. Now the last of the main deck is Fright for Jar. It's in the same realm as Toy Vendor, because the card's name becomes Toy Vendor, but it has a pretty useful effect. It's basically the opposite. Like if you could draw a card, and if it's an Edge Imp monster, You can destroy one card on the field, otherwise place one card from your hand on top of or bottom of your deck. But the effect that I like is that you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls, have its attack for the rest of the turn. So essentially you can, like let's say they bring out a Blue Eyes White Dragon, and you only have a, I don't know, Fluffle Dog or whatever. You could just use, well, yeah, you could just use this whenever it's in your graveyard, and you'll have the attack of that. You can take it out with Fluffle Dog, so it's nice. Now onto the extra deck. We have Mud Dragon of the Swamp. It's very situational, but it's really not useful. It's not useful at all. The next is Frightfur Tiger. It's pretty nice, but you have to fuse. You can't you have to fuse one Edgemp Sabers, and then one or more Fluffle monsters. So it's really picky about what it likes. So I don't really use this that often, but it does have a good effect. Whenever it's fusion summoned, you can target cards on the field up to the number of fusion materials used for this fusion summon and destroy them all. And then also all Frightfur monsters you can control gain 300 attack for each Fluffle monster or Frightfur monster you control. Has pretty nice effects, but I don't really use it very often. Next is Frightfur Chimera. Again, it has a pretty decent effects, though they're kind of weak, and you have to use 3 Frightfur monsters, so it's really something to use with the Frightfur fusion. But if this card battles, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects until the end of the damage step, so it's really good as a beat stick because your opponents can't cancel out any damage it does until after the damage step, and at that point it doesn't really matter. And when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can special summon that monster to your field, but its attack is halved. This is a nice effect, but I haven't really got to use it because it doesn't really survive that long with the various spells in the game that will just clear my side of the field. And then also this card gains 300 attack for each monster you control that's owned by your opponent. So if you really want to build up this card, you're going to have to take out a lot of monsters that your opponent has and keep them on your side of the field as essentially fodder. Next, Frightfur Sabertooth. This is probably my favorite card because you have to use one Frightfur fusion monster and then one Fluffle or Edgemp monsters, so it's not too picky, and it's pretty easy to get Frightfur on the field. So what I like to combo that into is summon one of these 3 or 4 types, and then whenever your opponent decides to activate an effect, activate Frightfur March and destroy that effect, and then you destroy one of these, and then you'll use that to summon Frightfur Sabertooth. But make sure it doesn't get chained out because it's a win activation, so a lot of the times you'll summon this card out but you won't be able to use the effect. You can target one Frightfur monster in your graveyard, special summon it. So you gotta time it very well. And then also, if this card is fusion summoned using 3 or more fusion materials, it cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. So it works out as a pretty good wall unless your opponent has non-targeting effects, which quite often they do, but if they don't, then this one, just put it in defense position, it'll be safe for a while. Next is Frightfur Kraken. It's a pretty nice monster. You can, once per turn, you can target one monster your opponent controls, send it to the graveyard. It's a pretty useful effect, but it cannot attack directly the turn that this is activated. So it's pretty useful, but oftentimes I'll leave it in defense position and you'll still get just knocked out anyways. So you got to be kind of careful. If you're gonna summon something like that, I'd rather just go for Frightfur Tiger, so that way I can destroy 2 or 3 things rather than just one, and still be able to attack. But it's pretty good for just fusion material. Next is Frightfur Daredevil. This one is a nice beat stick, really. Whenever you summon it, well, not whenever you summon it, but whenever this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can inflict 1,000 damage onto your opponent. So it's kind of like a Conductor Tyranno in a way, but you can't destroy anything really easily. You can only attack and hope that your attack is higher. This effect is really nice. It can win you games pretty easily. And whenever this card is destroyed or leaves the field by opponent's card effect, you can inflict 500 damage to your opponent for each fight for a monster in your graveyard. Now this effect combos very nicely with Fight for a Cruel Whale that we're going to go on to. The effect combos nicely because whenever this card is fusion summoned, you can destroy one card on both players' field, but the quick effect is you can target one fusion monster you control, send one Fright for card from your deck or extra deck to the graveyard. So, and it'll gain attack equal to half its original attack until the end of the turn. So you can basically, if you can last long enough, you can send a bunch of these cards to the graveyard, and then whenever this one dies, it can do a maximum of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 3,000 attack. So 3,000 damage, I guess. Yeah, 3,000 whenever it gets destroyed. But this one I like to bring out if I just want to like knock out one opponent's monster real quick. You'll fusion summon it and then destroy this card and then the card that you want to destroy. And then it goes to the graveyard, and then you can use one of your Fight for repairs or Fight for fusion. Really anything you want. Now the last card that we have is the Dangerous Fight for Nightmare. This one is a really nice card. I like to bring it out quite often. Usually I'll bring this one out first, and then I'll do a combo to get it into a Fight for Sabretooth, and then bring this out again in defense position because it gains attack for each fairy or fiend monster in your graveyard during your turn only. So it's really nice because you can basically go from 2,000 to 3,000 or even 4,000 attack just out of nowhere. And then whenever this card is fusion summoned and destroys a monster by battle, you can target one Fight for, Fluffle, or Edgemp monsters in your deck to the graveyard equal to the original level of that destroyed monster. So every time you destroy something, you can send something from up here to the graveyard and you'll get even more damage, which combos quite well with Daredevil. Not Daredevil, but combos quite well with Cruel Whale as well. Just combos with anything. But this is the icing on the cake. When your opponent activates a card or effect that targets this card on the field, you can banish one Fright for a monster from your extra deck, negate that effect. So it has pretty nice protection, but it has to target the Nightmare. You can't use it to protect any other cards, so that's why I like to combo it with Fight for Sabretooth with 3 or more fusion material, because this one will be able to protect itself, and then this one also protects itself. So that was my overview on the Loner deck, and as to whether or not I recommend it, I do not recommend it, mainly because Super Poly is wasting the slots, and it's quite often that you'll get a dead hand, not dead hand, but a brick hand, because sometimes you'll just get all Fluffle and you won't be able to do anything, or you'll get all Edgemp and not be able to do anything. Like this card, for example, if you get a bunch of these, but you don't have any Fright for monsters, then you're just kind of screwed. You just have to place them down in defense position and hope eventually you'll draw a nice card. But again, Super Poly really limits this deck because there's nothing that Super Poly can really summon with this deck, because all of these are they're basically named materials, they're not generic. So if you wanted to make full use of the deck, I recommend go to either one of these decks. Probably this one though, because this deck has a lot of fusion monsters that don't require specific materials. For example, Predaplant, of Veritim. This one you just need 3 dark monsters on the field, and that's pretty easy to do since dark is one of the most common monster types. And this deck has a bunch of them like that, and it has 2 Super Poly as well. So if you were to use a Loner deck, just stay away from this one. Honestly, I think this one is probably the strongest, and then the hero deck is pretty strong because of the Destiny Hero, Destroyer, Phoenix, Enforcer. That one is pretty strong. Honestly, it's really strong. Quite often, this deck can't even get it off the field for the most part. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful or useful at all, feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, whatever you want, and do your best not to use this deck because it's not that good. It has 2 wasted card slots. Thank you for watching. Take care.